Hey folks, we are up and running. We're just tweaking some audio settings real quick. So let me get everything switched over and we will get started with today's jam stream. All right, we should have audio coming in from the loop station. I had to slightly remind myself how I have my audio set up when I switch things over. But hopefully I'm coming in loud and clear. I did see Iconic pop in. Iconic says been sick and sleeping past few streams. Couldn't drop by. Drop by now to say I'm still sick. Sit this out. Hope you have a great stream. Much love. All right, Iconic. Thanks for stopping by. I hope you feel better, dude. Being sick is no fun. All right, let me see where my audio's going here. All right, I've got a background loop just for some noise while I make sure everything else is going. I could boost EQ up a little bit. We'll put it about there, and then people can let me know if they need me to boost the volume anymore. I know once I start making actual beatbox noises, this particular setup is going to probably have a better upper end limit so that I'm not peaking the mic everywhere. But I'm using the same settings as before, so we'll leave it for now. Let me turn the loop on and kind of explain what I wanted to cover for today. This is a real simple BGM loop I put together as the stream was loading, in fact. And this one is kind of interesting because it's really a simple beat, but unlike the last few where I've done a couple random things with the synthesizer that's plugged in, it's just off at the moment. This one was done with the beat and the percussion using Beatbox sounds, and I just used a real quick bass preset from the synth. I haven't done a lot of beatbox type beats using mouth sounds on the loop station in a while. And it's primarily because I think the way the synthesizer stuff sounds is a little bit more clean and professional. But at some point, I wouldn't mind transitioning back to using a lot of what we've learned on the loop station to try and generate some purely beatbox focused loops. Since there's a lot of potential with the 505 and things that we've kind of learned along the way up till now. But we'll have to see. If I was looking at competing in Loop Station, which I can't really as a VTuber, but if I was considering doing that, I would need to learn how to create fully fleshed out songs using only the tools at my disposal on the Loop Station. Like you couldn't take a synthesizer on stage at a competitive Loop Station battle. But Battle C never really appealed to me that much. I mostly like just learning the instrument and figuring out how to create music. At some point, I'd like to get an RC505 Mark II, but that's an expensive investment, and I don't feel like I've learned everything I can learn on the 505 Mark I yet. But we'll see, maybe within the year. Hey, Red Dragon's here. What's up, Red Dragon? How are you doing today? How's stream volume? Can you hear me okay? I was telling folks that I was filling around my settings when we first started. I want to make sure everything sounds good when we get started here. also drop the volume of the background, simple background loop too, so I'm not competing with that. But okay, it looks like we're good on volume. Let me know if I need to adjust anything. Like I mentioned before, I've only used this audio setup a few times, but I think it'll work better, especially once we get to the BGM brainstorming and I can switch my input over to my regular setup and I can still talk. All right, so what are we going to be covering today on the Jam stream? This first one back in a while, just because I was gone. But we are going to start with one intro and warm up, like the header says. Oh, and I guess I should point this thing out too. It might be a little small on the screen because I didn't want it to take up a huge chunk, but there is a new chat command that I added, and I tested it out a few days ago, so it should work. But the animated GIF in the lower left over there is a promo thing for the new BGM project that's coming out later this spring. And I think most of you folks, especially ones who are in the Discord, have seen the trailer or teaser for it already. But as a way to kind of promote hype and awareness of the upcoming project, both Wazzy and I have these. I think it's the same GIFs. I'm trying to think. There's several of them. There you go. Erdrain got it. SOTS. SOTS. And what I'm going to be doing, every time I stream, I'm going to be switching the GIF. So it's this lady here who I'm not going to really explain too much. But the next time I stream, it'll be a different one. And if we ever want to just promote awareness, or if people haven't heard of the project, the redeem's on like a 15-minute cooldown. I would say don't spam it, but we now have a way to advertise, as it were, for upcoming Songs of the Spiral, or SOTS, as we're calling it. The project is really shaping up to be cool. I think you folks are really going to enjoy checking it out once it releases later this spring. Don't have an exact date yet, but it will be no later than the end of May. All right, let's go ahead and clear this off. And you folks might hear me mention the SOTS redeem thing on a couple streams until I've cycled through the 3 or 4 different GIFs that Wazzy gave me to use. So apologies if you hear me repeat that, but since we might have different people tuning in, I figured I'd explain why those things are there. But with that said, we can go ahead and get started. So real quick overview. I guess this should have waited to clear off the loop. It's okay. We're going to go through intro warm-up. We're going to go into technique, sound theory, and the topic of conversation today is something we've talked a bit about here or there, but I don't think I've devoted actual sound theory discussion time for it. We're going to talk about freestyle techniques today. I've been thinking throughout the week about some talking points on that, so that'll be our discussion for technique and sound theory. And then, just like we do normally on the streams here, we will devote the rest after that to BGM brainstorming and see if we can come up with some more ideas for future projects. Let's slide my synth over a little more. All right, we'll leave it there for now. All right, so let me run through some real quick drills for warm-up and also to test the levels on the sound setup. And we'll go ahead and get started. So let's get it. All right. I think the sound levels are okay. I was keeping an eye on the peaks, especially when I hit some of the sharper snares like the. And I think the settings for this, and you folks will, I'm sure, will tell me if it's hard to hear, but I guess this setup doesn't quite peak quite as high as whatever I have set up normally, which is okay. Some of the sounds can be really, really sharp on the mic. So I think we're okay with sound settings for now. I'll leave everything where it is until people tell me otherwise. But let's change our caption and segue from warm up to technique and sound theory. And like usual for this particular part of the jam stream, not only is this part kind of dedicated to discussing things about beatbox technique, sound theory, and whatnot, but it's also open forum for questions. I always say if people have specific questions about things I cover or anything related to beatboxing specifically, then feel free to ask the questions whenever, especially during right now, since it's just kind of an open forum in addition to the topics I want to cover. So we're going to be talking a little bit about freestyle techniques. And this is something I've been thinking about throughout the week. And I had kind of an idea on how I wanted to present the information for the stream today. And it's not really a new topic. We have to deal with freestyle stuff all the time on this channel in general. When people have the drop a beat redeem here on these jam streams, when I'm doing practice, or specifically when we do the freestyle challenge, which we're not going to do today, but we'll be doing again in the future, where I run the timer and have to freestyle back-to-back patterns, routines, or whatnot in beatboxing without stopping. And the challenge is to see how long I can go without having to physically take a break. And personal best, without pulling it up here in the overlay, I think it's like 23 or 4 minutes the last time we did it. Unless I got to 30. Huh. It's right here on my list. 22. The last time we did it, it was 22 minutes, 42 seconds, nonstop. Our Dragon says that long. Yeah, we started, I think, at like 12 minutes or 15 minutes when we first did it last year. And every time the goal is to get a little bit further, right? And so last time we did it was just under 23 minutes. The next goal, and we'll see if I can pull it off next time I run the challenge, but the next goal is to hit 30. 30 minutes straight doing freestyling without stopping. Again, I can take like a brief half-second pause if I need to breathe or whatever, but I can't physically stop what I'm doing, take like a drink of water or whatever. I can't physically stop. Otherwise, it ends the challenge and the timer. And so the short-term goal would be to hit 30 minutes. I think that'd be a pretty good achievement. And then you never know. Maybe 6 months from now, we'll be pushing like 40 or 50 minutes, or, in long term, maybe I'll hit an hour straight without stopping. That would be a pretty impressive feat to accomplish. I think I could do it. It'd be more a matter of if my mouth gets too dry because I'm not drinking any water, and it's kind of tough to keep going, but you never know. 4 days. There's got to be a Guinness Book of World Records for longest continuous like beatboxing sequence or something, I'm sure. But some of the pros out there, especially the ones who are content creators and stream, will sit there for a couple hours and they'll just be going nonstop. I don't know if they'll be going continuously without taking a single break, but they're essentially on the stream just practicing and running through their beatbox stuff just constantly. They're not doing like little snippets here and then stopping to talk to chat for 30 minutes and doing more. They're just going, and people are kind of tuning in to watch them practice and grind. And so the pros out there, I'm sure, are capable of doing it for like 5 hours straight. It might be really tiring, but we'll have to kind of see where we work up to here. 'Cause I'm not a pro, but the more you do it, the kind of easier it becomes, which is why I wanted to talk specifically about freestyle techniques on the technique sound theory discussion today. Oh, I see. Red Dragon says Guinness Book of World Records. 25 hours and 30 minutes back in 21 October 2012. That's interesting. Red Dragon, does it say who the beatboxer was that did it? Because that's earlier than I was part of the scene for everything. So it would either be one of the Peter Wehrman. I don't know Peter Wehrman. Maybe he's one of the OGs in the scene. I have a pretty good knowledge of folks that were like the old school generation and then the younger new school generation and people that are kind of coming up now. But I might have to go look him up and see what he did. Obviously, he had some level of chops to be able to do that for over a day. Oh, cool! Thanks for putting it in the Discord, or Dragon. I'm gonna take a look at that. That's really interesting. Man, 25 hours. That's nuts. Okay, so probably won't be gunning for the Guinness Book of World Records. I can't stay awake for 25 hours. At least not normally and not without dying. I had to when I was traveling and it was a little bit rough. But that's nuts. So when we talk about freestyling specifically, as a concept, it's not really that nebulous or that complicated, right? It's just the idea of coming up with ideas on the fly, pulling them straight from your brain, and then applying them to whatever's you're doing. And it's not just beatboxing or freestyling is the case. It's pretty much any sort of creative medium when you think about it. The biggest one, bigger than beatboxing, I would say, for freestyling examples would be rapping. And a good reference point for freestyle rapping, which is a very impressive talent. I do some rapping, but I can't freestyle. If you give me a mic and a beat, it will not go well because I don't practice freestyling. I should, and I'd like to get better at it, but I'm not a freestyle rapper. But there's a YouTuber who's been grinding for a long time. He's been around for a bit, but his name is Harry Mack. He's from California, I think. I don't know if he's born there. I think he was born in Oregon, but he's from California in the States. And his whole thing for a long time was just going around doing random freestyle things in public. And a couple of his videos went really viral a while back of him like on Venice Beach, just going to random people with a speaker and saying, hey, give me some words and I'll freestyle a beat. The dude is insanely talented, and he's kind of big when Omegle still existed, that kind of chat roulette type program where you could talk to random people, because he'd go on there with his audio setup, and then random people he'd run into, he'd say, hey, give me some words and I'll do like a freestyle rap on the spot. I've been following his YouTube channel for a while. He's a really talented guy, and I've seen him in concert. He performed in my city last year, and it was insane. There's a ton of people there, and he basically did his similar type of thing where he had some songs that he was going to perform. He had an app interface, which was really cool, where people in the audience could just text to like an app number, random song or words for him to use, and he'd have them pop up on stage on a big display. So he had no idea what people were going to say, and when it came in, he would basically just have a beat going with his DJ, and he would use the words that people were sending through this app to freestyle stuff, and it was insane. It was an awesome concert. But Harry Mack as a rapper is a really good example of high levels of freestyling when it comes to having to improv ideas and come up with things on the fly, which translating over to the beatbox side, it's the same type of methodology, but the way you have to think about it is a little bit different because you're not doing words and rhymes. In a way, it's easier and harder in that you're just coming up with combinations of sounds that are going to be a cohesive beat, whether it's patterns strung together or routines that you're pulling. It kind of just depends on what angle you want to approach freestyling. Hey, Capri Sun's here. Capri Sun says, hey, sorry I'm late. I was at the hospital checking on my friend. Hey, you don't have to apologize when you show up to the stream, Capri Sun. You folks can show up whenever you want to and whenever you can. So no worries. All you really missed was just some discussion of the warm up, and we're getting into the technique sound theory stuff now. So you're just in time to hear what we're going through on the technique sound theory side, which is discussions about freestyle techniques in beatboxing. I was just mentioning some parallels with the freestyle rapping side. Again, not something I'm good at, but I wanted to take some of the ideas of people I know who are good at it and explain how it translates to beatboxing. So, what's the big difference? Well, the biggest difference is if you're doing freestyle rapping, their main thing is coming up with words and rhymes in a rhyme scheme that you can pull out of thin air as you know you're listening to a beat in order to put those rhymes together. And things like cadence, flow, and everything else is all built into that. Beatboxing, on the other hand, is a similar concept. It's just sounds instead of words. And you have to deal with things like sound structure and song genre and type, which I think is one of the more challenging aspects of freestyling for beatboxing because you're not really using an existing like beat like you would be for freestyle rapping and mapping your stuff to that. You are creating the beat in beatboxing. And so when it comes to things I would recommend people just focus on when it comes to freestyle techniques, it's the whole point of the discussion. It's one, have kind of like a big catalog of genres in your brain that you know you can pull from in a pinch. And two, it comes down to the mastery of sounds. And that's a little bit tough because it requires a lot more practice and kind of grinding. But the point of being able to, or the goal rather, of being able to freestyle effectively comes down to not having to think about the sounds as much. And I know that's kind of a weird thing to say for people that are learning, but once you sort of practice the basics of beatbox sounds, we talk about the toolkit, right? Like your kicks, hats, snares, and then your basses, things like your supplementary bass related sounds, unique sounds, all those things that you're practicing when you're out there just grinding away at techniques. Oh, I need to drink more. I'm getting voice cracks. That's embarrassing. All of these things that you're having to sort of practice and get good at eventually, after you've been doing it for a while, you won't have to think about it as hard when it comes to the sounds you want to generate. And you shift your brain focus away from, oh, I need to do this snare or this type of sound combination to purely the style of the song or genre you want to create. And then just kind of naturally you pull together sounds from the whole sound inventory like we've talked about in the past. And instead of having to think about doing each sound specifically, you're focusing on, okay, I'm doing a hip hop type beat and I'm want to switch it up coming up in a few bars. What individual sounds do I want to put together to transition to the next style? And after you've practiced it enough and get kind of familiar with the techniques, it's going to be a matter of, okay, I'm going to go dubstep and here's a sound combination set I like to use for that. And you kind of default that automatically instead of having to think, okay, I'm going to select this snare, this kick style, this hat, and everything else. So we'll talk about it a little bit more, and I'll try and mix in examples so that makes sense. But the best way I think people can kind of practice and get used to the idea of freestyling, one, it's just to do beatboxing for one, just keep grinding over and over again, but also experiment, try and push your comfort level when it comes to what you're doing. Like, say for example, you really like hip hop. It's your main style that you like to create things in, and might have been why you wanted to learn beatboxing, right? So we take our example, and let's say we do kind of a quote unquote stereotypical slower tempo hip hop beat. It might be something like and we won't get into too much complex bass and everything. We'll try and keep the example a little just simple for the sake of explaining stuff here. But when you're practicing and saying, okay, here's the beat that I'm trying to just refine and use to practice all of the sounds that I'm doing. But what I recommend you try doing, and folks who are actively learning beatboxing, if you try this and it helps, let me know. I always welcome feedback for the stuff I talk about here. But as kind of like the level one, I would say get used to the idea of staying within the genre, but switching the beat to a slightly different variation or something within the genre. So rather than go from like a hip hop beat to like an EDM or dance style techno beat, stay within hip hop, but switch up the combination of instruments for the beat itself. And it might be that you have to practice two different beats separately to kind of get them in your brain. But once they're there, you want to practice stringing them together so there's a transition and they're basically combined instead of being beat one, beat two. You want to sort of put them together because learning how to go seamlessly from one sequence to another is part of what makes this whole switch up style of freestyling itself interesting, because people who are listening to it will say, "Oh, that's pretty cool," and then you switch it on them, and then they go, "Oh, wow, now it's something completely different." So let's kind of work through that example in real time, and I can kind of demonstrate what I'm talking about. So again, the first one, again, simple hip hop ish type beat, and it sounds like pretty simple combination of kicks, hats, and it's an inward K snare. Let's create a different beat that's still within the hip hop style and genre, but different combination of instruments. Let's maybe switch it to an outwards K just to keep it relatively simple for the example. Maybe we do something like a little bit too similar. Maybe something like that's a little bit more distinct. It's not, again, night and day different. But in the exercise, you would practice each of those sequences separately until they're kind of ingrained in your mind. You don't have to think about them too hard. And then once you feel like you can pull those out of thin air without thinking too hard about it, you practice doing one and then segueing and transitioning into the other and trying to make that transition really smooth so that the listener, again, is not hearing this jarring jump from one beat to another. And it sounds kind of more like the way a DJ would mix songs together and have kind of like a transition between to make it smooth. So putting that into practice, and this is a little bit difficult for me in real time because I don't normally think about multiple beats this way, but I guess it's good for me to kind of practice what I preach. Let's take the first beat and then stitch it together with the second one and see how seamless of a transition we can make and see if, this idea can be put into practice. So the first one, and it might not be a carbon copy of each one, but I'm going to do my best and get close as possible here. So the first one. And so in this example, again, it's two somewhat similar beats. They don't have exactly the same BPM tempo, but it's pretty close without being able to tell you what it is. I tell you that the tempos are similar, but not identical. One of the things that I kind of picked up just through watching other beatboxers when I was first learning and beginning and exploring the idea of how to take one sequence and then add another sequence and then move between them so it's not jarring. Again, transition. One thing I saw people do is have something that bridges between A, B, and then like B, C, and then anything that you're putting together. Depending on how you're structuring your progression in the beats, sometimes you can just go directly from one to another, and it's fine as long as you don't just stop and kind of break the immersion when it comes to what you're performing in quotes. But it doesn't always work that way, especially if two things you're combining are drastically different in style. It kind of depends, but I did put this into practice in what we just did in this exercise, so I want to kind of explain it. So when we went from the first hip hop beat, one that goes etc., knowing I was going to switch from that one to the other hip hop ish type beat that went, you could do like a real clean break and go from one to the other, and it would probably be okay because they're somewhat similar in tempo and style. And if you did that, it would sound like. And you could do that and be perfectly fine to the ear. When I listen to it as it's being made, it just sounds like you're going from one to the other. But what I did when I put them together in the example is I put a really simple single kick transition in between the two to bridge that transition and cause the listener's ear to pay attention. And the way it sounded was something like this. This is what I did, and then I'll explain it. So went from one and then I'll just play the whole thing out and explain what I did. So we went from one and so the transition is just that single line of kicks where it's when, and you don't have to do that. Again, it's kind of a stylistic choice, but since the listener, if we think about how an audience would perceive the things being performed, again, everyone's ear would be keyed into the beat and it would become familiar to the listener and then, oh, hip hop beat. And they hear it repeated over and over again as part of the performance with little things filled in like technicality and kind of fills and things to give it some flavor. But they're still hearing that core beat repeated over and over again. But once they hear the transition, again, the single kicks, the listener is immediately going to think, oh, that's different. Something is probably going to happen. And it points the ear towards that transition. And then when you jump to the next beat, then the audience is kind of prepared for it. And it kind of, again, eases the listener into that change, which, again, you don't have to do. But I think it makes it a bit more dynamic to make it so it's not jarring. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of the more extreme examples as part of the discussion in a minute. But one thing to just think about when you're trying to put together things from a freestyle perspective is, how do I want to make that transition sound smooth? Do I need one? It's kind of just an experimental type of thing where you see what works and what doesn't. But it's really an interesting part of the creative process when it comes to just figuring out style and how you want to execute things in beatboxing. And that's one of the reasons why it's such an interesting art form. It's pretty much open to your creativity and your tool set. And so going back to what we talked about at the beginning of what should a beatboxer be focusing on when it comes to developing the skill set is give yourself as many tools as possible. Start with the basics when you're learning, but don't be afraid to incorporate other types of sounds you might not know and get good with those so that you could start putting things together when it comes to applying all the stuff that you learn. And that takes time. No one is getting into beatboxing and being an expert at freestyling. I'm certainly not myself. But as you learn and experiment, you start thinking of things that will fit together well, and your brain will kind of gravitate towards different styles or genres, and it becomes a lot more kind of open ended when you're looking at creating things. So, in the example, to kind of move on to another way to show what we're talking about, let's say you wanted to go to a completely different style when you're putting things together in just a freestyle session. And this is maybe one level of complexity higher than what we just talked about, but it's probably something that most people are going to want to get familiar with when it comes to being able to, again, put what you learn into practice. So let's take the first hip hop beat, we'll keep that the same, but we want to switch to a different genre entirely, step away from hip hop, something that's dramatically different in style. And so again, the hip hop beat, just to capture it, is the one that goes, and we'll keep it just really simple with that. What we want is to transition to something that is very different in style and tempo and everything else, to the point, just for the sake of demonstrating things, rather than just keep it a rhythm, let's make it kind of more of a fleshed out, quote unquote, song, just to kind of show off, not show off, but to demonstrate how you would look at transitioning from one to the other to not make it look really Frankenstein together, as it were. And so the idea I had when I think of hip hop and like especially slower old school hip hop with that kind of beat, something very different in feel, style, and genre would be like a drum and bass song. And when we think of drum and bass, for folks who listen to that style of music, probably the most common stereotypical in quotes example of a drum and bass type beat is that real simple like 1 2 1 2 type beat, and be something like, I don't want to say it's overly simple because you can do a lot of things like add a bunch of hats and things around that central beat to give it a lot more flavor and boost its complexity. But a lot of drum and bass stuff has that rhythm. It's kind of just become the mainstay of the genre. But rather than go straight from the hip hop beat into that drum and bass beat, again, just for the sake of showing what I'm talking about when it comes to the transition, I think it would be a better exercise and a tougher exercise to have the beat as kind of like this intro warm up type thing, and then you have a transition that starts into the actual drum and bass song. So not just the beat by itself and then you're going, but an actual more like a routine where you have the transition, an intro, a lead up, like a build up to a drop, and then after that build up, then you drop the beat itself and you go into the drum and bass part. So you can think of it kind of like putting together two routines instead of just beat one and beat two. And that's a lot more difficult of an example, but it's good practice. So let me take a stab at it. I'm trying to think of the best way to show it off for the sake of just explaining. Let me just try it, and then we'll go back and talk about the way it turned out and see from listening if I was successful in kind of illustrating how to put two things together and make it smooth in between the two. And this isn't something I prepared before the stream. I'm going to just do this live, as it were, and try and come up with something, and we'll see if it works. So to that end, I'm going to take the original hip hop beat and I'm going to put a little bit of bass with it, make it a little more complicated. Like, we have the song being performed, and then we're going to switch to a drum and bass song, and we're going to do it all organically. Boy, my voice cracking a lot today. We're going to do it organically, just based on pulling things out of thin air, and this is kind of what we're talking about with freestyling. We'll see if it works. So we'll have the hip hop beat intro a little bit, repeat for several bars, and then we'll transition into the drum and bass stuff, and then we'll go back and kind of dissect it and see what we did. So let's give it a try. What's the worst that could happen? I realized 2 bars into the hip hop beat that I tweaked it slightly and sort of combined the rhythm of the second one that we did in the first example with the first one, which doesn't matter, just think it's kind of funny. But what I did, again, step back and explain, was had a real quick intro and then hip hop beat playing for it was like 6 or 8 repetitions with the combination of the bass, all of the instruments, and then for the transition in quotes, I basically faded everything out to just a bass tone, a series of bass tone notes. It wasn't like a complex melody or anything like that, but everything sort of drops out and you're hearing the melody of the bass line, and then the drum and bass stuff starts with like a ramp up, as it were. I could have done it a little bit better thinking back, but you have the bass tone ramp up a little bit, and then you have the build up to the drop with just the bass tone and the PF snares. And then once you sort of hit the drop point, then instead of it being like a dubstep type, like aggressive, low series of kind of like growling basses and things that are heavy, because we're doing drum and bass, we went into the actual drum and bass rhythm combined with the bass line and whatnot. And so I don't know if that's a good example for folks who are listening and watching on stream, but having just the lead into the different song with the bass tones and whatnot is meant to show the listener, hey, we're about to switch things up. The style of the song has changed, and now we're doing something different. And I think the logical progression when you're practicing of beat 1 to beat 2 eventually becomes routine 1 to routine 2, and figuring out how to, again, bridge the gap and make it so that you're not just breaking one and starting the other. Instead, you're making it smoother for the listener to go from one to the other and kind of pointing their attention towards things in between. And that's just something that comes with experimenting and practice. But if you listen to a lot of music, then especially things that are kind of like DJ mixes and things that are multiple songs put together, you can kind of hear just through examples of people out there in the regular music field how they weave songs together to make it so that it's not jarring. And taking that idea and applying it to beatboxing is a really, really useful skill to build. Because if you're ever out there in the wild doing this in front of people and you want to be able to show kind of mastery of different styles and whatnot, being able to put things together in a way that makes it seamless is a much more, I think, compelling experience. And it's just comes with, like I said, experimenting and seeing where your brain gravitates to. Capri Sun says, "Yeah, that was cool. Sorry, I'm making dinner." Oh, no worries. I don't. I'm not too worried about what you folks in the chat are interpreting. I guess it's fine. These are kind of like discussions, and they're meant to be a reference in the future. So folks who aren't here that are curious about what we discuss can tune into the archives and see what I talked about. But yeah, you're good, Capri Sun. Don't want to distract you from your dinner. But hopefully the discussion on freestyling is somewhat insightful. Again, it's kind of a difficult thing to teach because you can't really teach people to think dynamically. You just have to sort of experiment and develop that skill over time. But if I could point back to one recommendation I made earlier in the discussion when we were talking about it, the best way to prepare and give yourself tools for freestyling is just to get as much of a mastery of the basics when it comes to beatboxing as possible, so you don't have to think about it as much. That's the big thing that helps when it comes to freestyling, knowing like, oh, I don't have to think too much about which snare to use, because you just kind of randomize your list of instruments and, oh, it's going to be this snare fitting into this genre of music, whether it's, you know, a PF snare, K snare, or whatnot. And not having to think about it as much means you can think more about how you're constructing the songs themselves. And that's the part that's tough, but also a lot more fun to me, is just experimenting around with different ideas and coming up with combinations of things that work. And so we could definitely talk about this more in the future. If you folks want me to try and come up with more examples of how to put things together, or at least how I do rather, and kind of explain that, I definitely can. When we talk about my brainstorming ideas for these jam streams, I'm open to suggestions. So feel free to let me know, like in our Discord or whatnot, if you want me to develop topics more. And then when we get together on the jam streams, I'll have stuff prepared and we can talk about it. Let me check something real quick. But with that said, I think we can move on and do some BGM brainstorming. Again, it's first jam stream back in a few weeks, and it feels like forever. But let's come up with some ideas for future music release projects. So what I'm going to do is switch my mics around, switch my inputs so I can talk. We'll fire up the synthesizer, make sure everything is good with the loop, and then we will see what we can come up with for BGM ideas. Today's not going to be a BGM rush style session. It's just going to be talking through things at a regular rate and seeing what we come up with. And hopefully we can get several of them done today. I have some things I want to sort of focus on for future projects coming up, but should be interesting. So let me go and swap my inputs around, and then we will get started. And I'll change my caption first so I don't forget again. Okay, that's that. Now I'm going to move my mic over here. All right. Mic should sound a little different, but things should be coming in loud and clear. Now I'm back on I connected to my Scarlett. Is it coming in louder? Yeah, this one's boosted a bit higher just because the combination of stuff here is a little bit different. Might need to fix that on my RC505 source down the road, or just have my mic sensitivity up higher because hopefully it's not night and day difference in volume. I want things to be as close as possible, but as long as you can hear me, that's what matters. Let's test the input from the synth. Turn off, excuse me. Turn off the boosts to input on the synth itself. All right. Her dragon says, "Oh, piano." Good, so you can hear it. And yes, I understand. I say piano funny. I've said it that way my whole life. Red Dragon says, "Play Moonlight." I wish I could take requests. I don't know how to play the piano, Red Dragon. And maybe that's not super obvious because I don't really talk about it a lot, but I wish I could play the piano because it'd make writing melodies and things for these loops and BGM tracks way easier if I knew how to actually play it. I know a little bit about harmonizing chords, but other than that, I have got no instruction on playing it. But let's switch over to the rhythm toolkits. So I can kind of explain what we're going to try and create first here. Our Dragon says, "I wish I could have one." Do you know how to play piano? Did you go through lessons, or are you an active player? Because I always find that very impressive, people that can play the piano. It's a cool instrument. Okay, I'm going to start with percussion, rhythm lines. So first up, self-taught. Okay. Red Dragon says, "I know a little of Moonlight." I gotcha. That was explains why you you said that. I think the biggest hurdle for me trying to learn piano is being able to do two different things with my hands. And I could play a little bit of drums, so you'd think being able to do two different things would be easier, but since I don't know chords by their specific names, that's probably the first problem. And the second is having my hands do independent things is a level of wiring my brain doesn't have at the moment. Which is why, again, I find it impressive people can do it at a high level. All right, we're on the percussion. Where's all the reverb coming from? Our Dragon says, "Yeah, I understand that. There's a tuber that does shorts that I follow." Oh, for piano? Which one? There's a couple I follow that do music stuff. And there's this one young guy who does these really funny kind of piano-based shorts I've been following for a bit. His name's Daniel Thrasher. Really talented kid. It's kind of like a mix of improv and skits, all using piano and like skits that involve different versions of himself. He's pretty well known. I'm sure you might have seen his stuff come across your shorts feed. All right, let's leave the volume about here. So the first track I want to work on for a potential future project, I want to do something a bit more mellow and chill because we just had Titanium Forest come out last month. The one for the spring is going to be the RPG album, which is what the SOTS stuff is promoting. Oh, Keys Tutorials. Is that the one using that software for playing piano that has like the different song stuff and people usually play like well-known songs in that software. So I might have seen those too. I'll have to take a look. I'm going to switch our preset here. First, let's establish kind of a moderate rhythm that's going to be our jump off point for how we build the rest of the beat. Again, looking for something more smooth and chill. And we'll see what we come up with. I do like the rim shot snares, and especially on Neon Night Lounge from was it last year before? I can remember when my releases come out now. Doing kind of a mix of, I guess, hip hop adjacent rhythms with the kicks and the rim shot as the snare. It's one of my favorite combinations, but I just need to be careful about doing it too much, because I think a couple of them, we had things that had a rhythm, something like. That was one of them for sure. So maybe we could try and come up with something that's a little bit more of a different approach, but using the same instrument combination, and then flesh it out with hats and whatnot from some of the other kits. Yeah, that's similar to one we had too. Eventually, we're going to have overlaps in rhythms because there's only a set combination, a number of combinations of things, but we want to make it stylistically unique so we're not just carbon copying a previous beat. So let me noodle around here on the synth to come up with something. We get it to loop, and then we'll build out from there. So you're probably going to see my mono wig out as I look over here where my synth is. But let's see what we can come up with. And that might be too long of a too long of a sequence, especially if I have the last half be slightly offbeat. Okay, let's do kind of a variation of that and build around that to start. Let's loop it a little cleaner. There we go, it's better. Ooh, a little loud. All right, now for some hats. Ooh, we could do, this is ride cymbal. Nope, that's a crash cymbal. We drop this one down in the mix a little bit, have it kind of sort of in the background. Something like that. Oh, I should be paying attention to the playback. Let's leave it about there. I know my mic is coming in much higher than this, so I'm not too worried about it drowning me out. But let's leave it here, and you folks can let me know if I need to tweak anything as far as the balance, so I'm not getting drowned out by the loop. Okay, now we need a bass line, since we usually go rhythm, bass line, melodies. So first, let's come up with a good instrument we can use for our bass. And we frequently, on a lot of these, go bass presets or strings with bass, guitar to bass under to kind of boost the low end. Let's go for a different instrument and then go low end on the instrument and see if that works differently. So I'm going to do flutes. Some of the flutes work really well as bass lines if you just stick to the lower octaves. and then give that same guitar to bass boost. So let's try that with flutes. Here's we'll up the volume a little bit. Here's the basic instrument. Kind of sounds like an oboe when it's that high up. But if we drop down a little bit, you get that kind of more metallic, kind of resonant sound for a flute. But if we go way lower, still sounds like a flute, like a really low note flute. But if we add guitar to bass, then it gives it more of an actual quote unquote bass type sound, which is what we want. So let's see. Let's go 50%. Interesting how adding the guitar to bass as an effect, it basically takes that sort of echoey, metallic / woodwind type sound, and you don't hear it because the low end is being boosted so much. So if we even go up further, this will be pretty functional as a bass type note. So now we just need to figure out what kind of melody we want for the bass and plug it in with the rest. So let's see what we can come up with. Maybe start further up. This one, I don't know if that's part of an arpeggio, but we have it jumping up a bit and then dropping down and then kind of jumping in between. I wonder if I like the first note where it starts a little lower. Let's try that instead. Okay, that might work better. What we could do to build out the bass line is add another instrument, same melody, but we layer it with something else. Maybe we go recorder. Now let's go maybe string, and then we'll drop it in the mix a little bit so it's sort of underneath and not competing for the same melody. So we'll drop it down on the synth a little bit. Maybe one octave higher. It's hard to hear because it's so low. There we go, it's better. Okay, pretty simple combination of rhythm and bass. Now for first melody, like mid-high synth melody. Let's see, what would be a good combination? We could definitely take some of the synths we've used in the past and then maybe add in some effects, sort of change how they hit. Maybe we can do some slicer effects, but experiment with some of the other slicer patterns that are not just the single hit, single note cuts, which we've done on a lot of songs up till now. But first, let's come up with a synth to use. So I'm going to jump through the list and see. Make sure this doesn't get too loud. So let me go find a good synth, and then we'll look at some effects that we can apply over it to sort of change how it sounds. Oh, make sure to take guitar to bass off. This one is called Fantasia because it's got that kind of magical, whimsical type of feel to it. I do like this one. It's a synth I've used a couple times on the RPG projects. Now, how can we change it though? What if we put filter? Might just muffle it a little. Let's see what that sounds like. Oh, that's not bad. What kind of filter is this? Low pass? BPF, high pass. No, I think low sounds best. I do want to kind of use this particular melody, but I wasn't sure which synth I wanted to use. So let's kind of continue to tinker and see what we can get to slot in here. Now that's interesting because of the way the low pass filter is kind of muffling and distorting things. The kind of echoey, chimey effects of that particular synth kind of drop out. You don't really hear it as much. Instead, the oscillation makes it kind of warble, which I think is pretty functional. Let's try cutting this with a slicer rhythm and see how that works. Try 4. That's eighths, so we may want 16ths. I think it's too choppy. It sounds like the signal's being completely interrupted and cut, which... yeah, I don't really like that. What about another pattern? This is a 1-2-1-2 instead of 1-1-1-1 slicer. Pattern 2, about 6. Ooh, that's not bad actually. Triplet? We might even be able to drop the filter for using this as the slicer rhythm. It sounds kind of like a galloping rhythm, which I like the way it sounds, but I don't know if it fits. Maybe we don't slice this particular one, but I want to put a pin in that other one because it might be able to use that in something else. Okay, let's get this captured and then we'll move on. Maybe do it on rhythm. There we go, it's better. Okay, let's think about what we're going to add to the next track. We got 3 of 5, so now we're on loop track 4. Let's take a look at some other synths that are in the inventory here and see if anything would pair. This one, I think this one's a little bit too airy. If we were doing kind of a more haunting or kind of spooky-ish melody, this one's not bad, especially if you pair it with the chorus synth, which makes things sound kind of more sung. Now, let's see what else we got. This one, well, not in the string set. It's called Equinox. This one sounds very kind of string, like synth string E. Not bad, but I don't know if it really fits with what we're trying to do here. Maybe we need more of like a wind instrument. Oh, this one I've used before. This one's called Dark Moon. Kind of 80s peak synth pop type sound. It almost has that sort of filtered effect on it already. That's a possibility. That probably would work as an alternate melody with number 3, track 3, not at the same time because the melody is similar, but it moves into different progressions as it jumps up and down. So I think it would clash. Let's see what it sounds like if we put them together. Yeah, it's that last note. So this would function more like an alternate melody that we bring in and we swap it with number 3. If that last note was higher and it ended on the same note, we might actually have like a complementary melody that would be able to be played at the same time, but it's like one note off. I don't know if I'd want to do filter effect over the whole track for this one. Need to make sure my playback's not too high. Okay, I think this is a decent combination so far that works. We have an alternate melody, but we need something else that we can have as like a supplementary instrument that maybe is going to be carried throughout the rest of the track so that the two melodies can swap in and out. So let's see. Let's take a look at the list. Maybe we take Fargo, which I don't remember what number that is, but we can take that kind of warbling, buzzing distortion thing and maybe do like an alternate bass line or like a supplementary bass line thing that can just be under everything in the track. That might work decently. Just gotta figure out where that synth is. Oh, it's 101. There it goes. So this is one that has that kind of buzzing, resonant distortion on it. But if we went lower, maybe have it mirror the bass line, but we drop it way down so you just barely hear it under everything else. Let's see. If you drop it absolutely the lowest volume you can get without being inaudible, it does add a bit of sort of texture and flavor to the overall thing. And if the bass line itself is playing at the same time, it's very faint. Let's switch it with the other one, see what it sounds like. Okay, I think it's pretty functional. Let's save our progress so we don't lose the work we've done so far. Now, how would we actually arrange this one to be performed and recorded? We could start with just the beat and the Fargo distortion synth to give kind of a hint of what the bass line sounds like and then bring the bass line in. What would that sound like? I don't know if I've ever started a song like that in that order. That's an idea. We bring in the bass line and then we bring in the synth. Oh, missed it by like a half beat. And maybe we drop the rhythm out as we get ready to transition to the alternate melody. We bring the beat back and bring the alternate melody in all at the same time. We could have this be the segue to the outro from part B. I'll have to think about that a little bit. I think I like the second synth better than the first. So I'm tempted to, I'll leave it for now, but since I usually tweak these a little bit after we capture them on stream, I mean before I record them for placement into an actual release, maybe I will replace the original first synth on track 3 with something else. It's fine, but I like the way the second one sounds a little bit more, which is a little unexpected. And so maybe this one, maybe I'll replace this one. Or what we could do, where is that? Yeah, it's there. We could even layer that with something else to give it a bit more of a punch. And maybe octave it, so we're starting at C. That's also a possibility. This is like a vibraphone type of instrument. We're near the xylophone set of instruments on this particular part of the synth inventory. This is a marimba. I think that might sound a little bit too different. I don't dislike it. I think we need to keep with the kind of chimey synths that we have on this third track, just maybe a different one. Or piano complement might not be terrible. I gotta think about that. There's a bunch of different ways we could sort of supplement that particular melody. I might have to experiment around with that a little bit. Okay, so before we get ready to move on, let's do another save and think about how we would put the whole thing together. That way, if I need to refer back to the archive here when I'm actually recording this, we can know how it's going to be structured for the final version. Barring any changes to the instruments itself, but we'll assume that's not going to happen. So we said beat plus Fargo synth to start. Then bring the bass in. Let's assume we're not going to filter transition for now. So maybe we drop the beat for a little bit and bring in the synth. We bring the beat back with the high synth. We're ignoring the original first synth I created just because I don't know what I'm going to do with that one yet. moving towards outro, maybe we have just the beat, the bass, and the distortion. Ending with just the Fargo synth on its own would be interesting. That would be unique. I don't think I've done that on any of the tracks where that is an instrument as part of the mix. So that's a possibility too. It would be definitely kind of more of an unusual way to end a track like that. But I'll keep it as a possibility. We'll see. Okay, we'll do one more save on the file. And I think we'll call this one good. I may have to tweak a few things, especially with that first synth. But I think it's a pretty functional track for, again, going for something a bit more mellow and kind of more smooth and ambient in sound. I think for the next one, we'll switch things up style-wise. We'll go for a little bit higher energy just to have some contrast. So with that said, let's save onto a new file and then start putting some ideas together for another one. I'll worry about the name on that other one later. If it's going to go into one of the releases I'm thinking of, it will probably have a name ready for it. But first, let's clear off this loop, save a blank one, and let's start putting together ideas for the next track. I will say, and I haven't mentioned this in a few streams, I need to do another big recording session. I did one last week, right after I got back from the trip before I started streaming again, and pulled a bunch of captured loops into the recordings. But there's still more. I think I have maybe 10 more tracks, maybe even 12 more tracks that are captured that need to be recorded. So there's a decent amount of stuff I've got that'll be ready for releases. I just have to figure out what the releases are going to be. After SOTS, I think it's going to be a chill release for the summer. And then after that, we got to start thinking about Halloween. So I guess we'll just have to see how everything shakes out once I've got all the recordings done and figure out what's going to go where. We do need to think about the stuff for Halloween. I've got a couple tracks that are recorded. I think you folks have heard at least one of those I'm putting into that release. But eventually we'll have to get more in the spoopy mood. And maybe for this one we can try and do something a bit more darker and more brooding. It's an idea. I was thinking kind of something synthwave adjacent to start, but we could do something drum and bass like. Let's load up the drum preset we're going to use and start noodling around and see. Maybe something will jump out as I kind of mess around here. So let's take a look. The dance kit drum set here has a lot of really an electronic, stereotypical techno, dance, house-ish type instruments. So a bunch of these work really well for like a electronic type beat. You have a really like electronic sounding kick. Ooh, I don't know if I'm gonna use this one. This one sounds like it's like a muffled metallic sound. This one's usually my go-to. There's like three different kicks. If I was gonna do like a dance hip hop ish type beat, I'd use this one. It's pretty good for that. Reminds me of old school rap. But this one, there we go. I think I've used. Did I use this one for Satellite Strobe? No, I think it's a different snare, but one that sounds kind of similar. Let's mess around with this combination for something like drum and bass sounding. and then we'll supplement it with some of the other instruments from a different preset, so we're not using everything from the same kit. We could take this rhythm, and then I think the hats are going to be where we add a little bit more flavor, because we've got a couple that use this rhythm, but at different tempos, different BPMs. I wonder how fast we could push it for this. That's definitely too fast. Let's start with that, and then we'll flesh it out with some of the other instruments and see. Could also add in some more variation with the snare. It doesn't have to just be one snare. So let's give that a try. Mad hat. I think we have to drop it way down in the mix. That's too loud. This is actually kind of lower BPM than I thought it was going to be. I think about layering in another one of these snares. This is from the symphonic kit, which is a big difference for like an electronic type song. But it adds a little bit more punch. Maybe if we drop it even lower in the mix. And maybe not make it off beat. Pretty subtle. It's actually kind of hard to hear. Okay, let's think about bass lines now, which is the big part of drum and bass, right? What if we do like a kind of a distorted or boosted version of Synth 329? Which is, again, this is that kind of, I call it Sunsoft bass. It sounds like the old-timey Nintendo era synth type. But if we kind of distort it, you can do some really cool things with it. We might be going really low on this one, but we'll start with guitar to bass, and then maybe we slice this one. We'll see. By adding the guitar to bass, it gives it this kind of grittiness to it. That's not bad, but let's try not to repeat a melody from another song. Like Satellite Strobe, which is one of the ones for the drum and bass that really sticks out from the recent releases. That one goes, it's a little bit higher. Where'd that start? I don't remember where that one starts, but it's an ascending melody, so we don't want to just do that again. That is also, oh, which song was it? It might not be from a release that's come out. There's another one that has a really similar melody line to that. Maybe we go descending for this one. I don't know if I've done that a ton of the like 2 or 3 drum and bass songs I've attempted. That's not bad. Let's mess around with that combination. And then what we'll do is probably layer a couple different basses on top of it to give it more of a punch. Ooh, I didn't think about trying to go up 1 octave. You lose a bit of that kind of rumbling greenness to it. But we can kind of offset that by upping the bass boost level to give it more distortion like that. And what we could do is have this be the main melody, and then when we supplement it with one of the other basses that has more of a low end kind of speaker shaking rumble, then we'll get the low end punch we're looking for. Ooh, I don't think I've done that for a bass line. It's a real simple, just alternate lower stepping melody. But that might sound pretty good if we combine it with something that's going to have more of a boost. Let's do that. So we're starting up here. Yep. So what we want to do is probably drop the bass boost down a little, but jump over to the actual bass presets for maybe like the dance or synth bass, and do the same thing, same exact melody or progression of notes, but with a lower instrument, so it's going to punch a little bit harder. Ooh, that might be a little loud. But that's definitely like impactful enough that it would match drum and bass. I actually like the way that sounds. I think I mistakenly hit one of the other keys. But that's going to be what we do, I think. Okay, good. Now we need to come up with a complementary mid to high synth melody that's going to go with this. And I'm thinking we go slicer, maybe go one of the other pattern slicers, and we go for a higher synth with like a delay or a panning delay to have it move around, so it's not just like a beeping or like a signal. So we can take guitar to bass off. What we could do is, this is just the same bass instrument, I'm just way high up on the octave. What we can do is mess around with the rhythm, and then we'll go and look through the instruments to figure out what we're going to actually use for the instrument itself. What if we did... So this is... Oh, we're on pattern 3. This is 16th notes. About 30 seconds. Ooh. I like that rhythm. I don't like the instrument, but I like the rhythm. I know that's probably really loud in everyone's ear. Drop down. But we could take that, and then maybe we add panning delay. And I don't think I'm going to stick with just one note, but just to, again, place the rhythm and the effect. I actually like the way that sounds. Now let's figure out a good actual instrument for that, and we'll see if we want to go... This is the same note from the bass line, the same starting note, just way high up, like 3 or 4 octaves. But some of the other synth instrument types will probably sound a little bit better. Let's drop this down so I can talk. Okay, so we know the note. Let's find something else in the synth list here. This one's interesting. It's a bit more sharp. I don't know if I like the way it sounds, though. It's closer. Okay, that's a slight variation on what the bass line is doing, and I think it'll work, but I'm not sold on the instrument. This one's called Thick Saw. It's like a saw lead synth. That's not bad. That's closer. It's closer to what I'm thinking. This one's called Big Lead, whatever that means. That's got potential. What I did is I went to the slicer and I just kicked up the effect so it's a little more sharp in the cuts. Okay, that's functional. Let's see what else we have. We might come back to Big Lead. This one's 341. A whole bunch of like random synth sets. Oh, this is a choir one. No wonder it sounds so echoey. Huh. It's like a Cristoletos. Very chimey, kind of like glittery. That's something I should remember for a future song. Not this one specifically, but that is kind of a useful synth to have. Okay, what else we got? A glockenspiel. Too kind of bell sounding. Could jump down back to 329. This is the same synth from the bass line, but with different effects. That's actually probably gonna be it. But let's see if we can add maybe a slight delay to it. I cannot because I'm using those two for slicer and for the panning delay. That's okay. Let's slot that in now and see how it sounds. Want to do a little bit of a volume fade out at the end there. See if it actually captured. Yeah, it did. Okay, that's good. Okay, we got 3 tracks captured now. Let's see if we can get at least 1 or 2 more. All right, what else would we want to pair? Strings? Let's hear a lot of strings in drum and bass. That's an idea. Let's try it. Let's turn on the bass line and the beat and see if we can add one of the string synths and see how it sounds. Okay, let's turn off the effects. We don't want this one chopped up like the others. I feel like the strings are a bit distracting. Could go for an offbeat supplementary melody of sorts, because right now everything's pretty much 1 2 1 2 1 2 1 2. If we had an offbeat, like a syncopated rhythm, 1 1 1 1. I wonder, there's got to be a slicer pattern that does that. I might not know exactly which one it is, but we might be able to find out. Ooh, that's fun. That's the really fast galloping rhythm from 6 on 30 seconds. Oh, we might be able to do something with that. I've never used that particular slicer pattern before. That's it sounds like an old Atari game sound effect. This is just one of the basses, just way up in the octave. That would be really funny. Maybe we'll record one of these just for fun, and I'll see as I tweak this one later if it fits with the oral progression. Tempo wise it matches. It's just kind of silly. Let's see. Oh, that's an orchestral hit. We don't want that. What I have is the galloping synth plus a delay. I don't dislike that. I don't know if I want that note. That's an oboe. I wonder if we filter. This filter is going to be weird though. Yeah, this is the very specific type of distortion filter I have programmed into that particular one on A. We could, and this might be a little bit weird and dumb, but we could have this being a static note, and then rather than it be like a supplementary melody, it kind of comes and goes. Because this one does harmonize with a couple notes in the bass line. So we could have it just come and go intermittently. That would be an interesting idea. Let's try and record it and just see. I have 2 empty slots. That's interesting. Again, I don't think I've ever done that with a sliced instrument before. But it does add an interesting flavor. I don't know if it's a good flavor, but... But I like the idea that it kind of comes and goes. I'm going to keep that on 4 for now. Interesting. Very, very kind of different vibe for a drum and bass track compared to some of the other ones I've done. This is doing a reverse effect on the synth track just to see what it sounds like. It is interesting. It has this sort of kind of distortion because it's going in reverse, and the fade out, it makes it sound like it's kind of ramping up instead of fading out in volume. And because the progression of notes doesn't really go too far outside what the bass line's doing, as far as I can tell, it's not super dissonant. So we could even have this as like a part B. And this is the regular version with the reverse turned off. Now, how this one would be structured and performed, again, there's still one open track that I don't have filled, but that's okay for now. Can always think of something to put in there later. I think satellite strobe starts with the beat, then the bass line. I think that's the way it goes. It's either that or it's the empty beat and the bass line comes in right after it. So for this one, maybe we start with the bass line. And maybe play around with the beeping signal. We'll get rid of it. And we could fade in the beat instead of having just abruptly start and come in. Now get ready. We add the synth. Now think about how we would segue into the other part of the track itself. We could go empty beat. We could go beat plus bass line. I'd have to think a little bit about what makes the most sense there. Okay, that one's got potential. Let's save that. Could also, I don't know if I want to do a drop for that one. Let's see. Using beat repeat, what happens if we try and do not sold on that entirely. I think I slightly mistimed the actual beat repeat. That's a little bit better. I haven't done a drop in a while on a track, but I'll think about that. Might be able to make it work. Might sound kind of awkwardly forced in. I do like the idea of the reverse part B though. Okay, let's save the updates here. Maybe one more additional instrument track, which I'll have to think about when I get back to this one eventually. But it's definitely a functional prototype for a drum and bass song, which is good because I want to get better at writing that particular genre of music and style. But I think we will call it good here. I could do another one, but I got to go take care of some stuff. So instead, let's go take a look at the homie list and see who's online that we can raid. I see Truck Sama's online. They are playing Minecraft. Oh boy. We can go raid Truck Sama. Let's see how the Minecrafting is going. So let me go ahead and mute this and we will go to outro. So I think this was productive. It was good to get back into kind of the swing of things with the jam streams. I'll go check out the audio on the archives when I'm done and make sure my settings don't need to be adjusted. I might have to up the settings on the loop station if this regular input was louder, but I'll figure that out offline. But until then, thanks again for hanging out, folks. Hope everyone has a good rest of your day today. The stream schedule will be up for the end of the day today once I figure out what it's going to be next week. And until then, I will catch you folks in the next one. Now let's go see what Truck Sama's doing.